Hello and welcome back to the channel. We are still talking about Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Looks like this might be a 6-video series, my friends. There we go. Today I want to talk about colonialism, because you literally can't talk about this book without talking about colonialism. So, as I said when we did the introduction, one of the things about this book is that it is a reaction to colonialist literature. It is a reaction to specifically Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. But more importantly, it is about how the stories of the native people of Nigeria, the Igbo people, how they are told. Now, the land which would become known as Nigeria was colonized officially by the British in 1884, which means that it's probably about when this book is taking place. This book is probably set maybe a few years earlier because, of course, the British didn't just come right in and plant their flag and now it is theirs. There's work to be done before that. But nevertheless, we're talking the late 1800s here. And a lot of what this book is about is kind of what happens when this foreign power comes in, sets up shop, and then starts deciding how things are going to work here, right? Because it's not their land. It never was. But now it is because they said so. So I want to make it very clear, by the way, I am not a fan of colonialism. I know that is a tough hill to die on, but I will. There we go. Or at least maybe I'll get severely injured on. I don't know. It's brave of me to say. Colonialism, not a great thing. Nope. I'll stick by that. Anyway, like I said, the British arrived in what would become Nigeria in the late 1800s, and so that does give us a time frame for this book. And the way that Achebe handles it is very interesting. The first part of the book, where he gives us the cultures and the traditions and the various sort of aspects of Igbo society, is interestingly timeless. And I say that, and what that means is you literally do not know when this book is happening, because the Igbo people don't keep track like that, I suppose. There is no calendar that they're going by other than sort of the yearly seasonal kind of planting and harvesting and work calendar. They don't seem terribly interested in maybe a long-term record of how long things have been the way they are. It's just, is it within living memory or not, right? The very beginning of the book, when they talk about Okonkwo winning his battle over Amalinze the cat, it is given weight because it is the greatest fight in the memory of the old men who still live. So they're not keeping a calendar the same way we are, so we don't really get any sense of when things happen. And it's nice. It is pleasant. It doesn't, at first it might bug you a little bit, but for a while you're like, doesn't matter when this is happening. This could be 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years ago. And I think that's an important point, that the culture that we are seeing is very old. That the culture that a lot of non-Africans, a lot of Americans and Europeans, probably, number one, don't know much about, number two, don't care to know much about, and number three, normally would depict as a bunch of, angry savages. There is a culture, it is very old. And that's kind of, I think, why Achebe did not tell us at the outset, okay, this is happening in, the year 1870 or something like that. It could be any time and it doesn't matter. And then when we do realize, there's 2 clues which help us kind of pin down when this is happening. One is that Okonkwo has a gun. He has a rifle. That puts it probably at the earliest, I think, like 1600s maybe. I'm not a gun expert, but I'm off the top of my head. 1600 maybe. And then later there is someone finds a bicycle. And so that brings it up a lot. And then, of course, the British show up, and that kind of pins it to the end of the 1800s. And once that happens, once we get kind of a date, sort of, or a time frame, we know it's Victorian England, then things seem to happen really quickly. Like the first part of the book is very relaxed and laid back. Events happen. It's very episodic. It doesn't, some of the things that happen have repercussions later. Some of them don't. It doesn't really matter. You're reading these stories of Umuofia, and it's nice, it's pleasant. But once the outsiders show up, once the British show up, it becomes a much faster-paced novel, and things start to happen one after another. Change begins to happen very, very quickly. So one of the questions that I think Achebe is raising in the book is certainly, what are the effects of colonization? And then one of the other questions, maybe one of the unspoken questions is, is colonization good for anybody? So the first part we've kind of covered in some of the previous videos. What are the effects of colonization? Certainly the colonizers, and this is usually true in a lot of colonial inroads, the colonizers will bring sort of their modern technology with them, modern building methods with them. So the missionaries come in and they start building their church out in the evil forest, and they're building in ways that are different from the ways that the Igbo people do. The Igbo people build these, lovely clay houses and houses out of mud, mud walls and things like that. The missionaries are bringing sort of more modern, I guess, European building methods. You see them with new medicine. You see them with new technologies and new devices and things that otherwise the Igbo would not have had. Now, do they necessarily make Igbo people's lives better? No, they were doing just fine without a lot of that stuff. They were cruising along. They didn't even know that they needed anything, in a sense. And so, yeah, the stuff that a colonizer brings is fancy and new. And maybe some of it legitimately helps, right? When you bring like a trained doctor, you bring really sort of well-tested, scientifically tested medicine. There's no doubt that is an advantage. And it is good. But with that comes a lot of other stuff, because you are now, by bringing your medicine and your scholarship and all of that, you are, whether you want to be or not, you are displacing something. You are removing something. There are traditional methods of healing and dealing with the sick that you have now taken away. And it's not so much that your healing methods work better, because they do, but the traditional methods are not just about healing the sick. They are about maybe the connections between the community. They're about the connections between the people and the gods that they have. There are other aspects to the way people are healed in this sort of indigenous society that are now being moved to the side because you brought with you penicillin. That makes sense? I think that makes sense. It makes sense up here. It's all that matters. We see the changes happening. We see people making adaptations as these new ideas and new technologies show up. And there's one place in the book where this culture is kind of directly addressed. There's a conversation that is held mostly about religion. So you have Mr. Brown, who is the leader of the missionaries in Umuofia. And Mr. Brown is, by all accounts, a fairly nice person. He tells his people to tread lightly around the people of Umuofia. He tells people to respect the local traditions and local cultures, but he is a missionary. And he has a conversation with one of the sort of great men of the village, a guy named Akuna, this conversation is really interesting because you see these two men discussing religion and sort of religious philosophy as equals, right? So Akuna says to Mr. Brown, "You say there is one supreme God who made heaven and earth. We also believe in him. We call him Chukwu. He made all the world and all the other gods." To which Mr. Brown responds, "There are no other gods. Chukwu is the only God and all the others are false. You carve a piece of wood, like that one, and you call it a god, but it's still a piece of wood." "Yes," said Akuna, "it is indeed a piece of wood. The tree from which it came was made by Chukwu, as indeed all minor gods were, but he was made for them for his messengers, so we could approach him through them. It is like yourself. You are the head of your church." And they have this almost Socratic conversation where they try to figure out where the similarities and differences are in their belief systems. And the conversation is a fascinating conversation. I really like it because you realize that they're on a lot of common ground, and the only sort of sticking ground is sort of what do you call a god, right? What do you refer to as a god? I think it would have been interesting if the missionaries were Catholic missionaries. I don't think they were, because they could have brought the saints into it, and that would have been fun. But yeah, it's a fascinating conversation, and you can see at least these two men trying to work this out, trying to figure out how can we have both? How can we have these missionaries and our Christian brothers and sisters, and then how can we also keep as much of our traditions as we can? And for a moment, when you're reading that, you're like, good. Two reasonable people are talking. Everything will be fine. But of course, Mr. Brown ends up having to leave, and he is replaced by someone much less flexible and much less interested in finding common ground. And then, of course, as I said, the consequences just accelerate. So the consequences of this colonization, of course, as I talked about before, when we talked about tradition versus change, a lot of the traditions are pushed aside. I mentioned one of the traditions I don't like is when a woman has twins and they are left to die in the evil forest. I feel terrible about that. I think that's awful. I don't think it's not the twins' fault. They don't deserve any of this. And when the missionaries come, they start to take care of the twins. They start taking them in as their own. And I think that's a good move. I'm solidly, once again, I know it's going to be controversial, but I'm going to say don't kill babies. Come at me. But again, when you start to change these things, when you start to change these traditional beliefs and traditional actions, even if they are things that you would find awful, you are making a modification that these people did not ask for, that they did not request of you. For them, this works, and this is not a problem. And we see that with the killing of the sacred python. We see that with, at one point, one of the converts unmasks one of the Igugu, which is fundamentally killing this ancestral spirit. And the whole village, if there's any point where things could get really, really bad, this is it. Because the whole village is like, all right, you've crossed that line. We've been very nice to you. We let you build your church. We let you take the twins. Fine, whatever. But you've just done something really, really awful. And that is kind of the point where we start to see the power of force come in, where we start to see sort of security forces coming in. We see the governor come in. And we see now just living alongside each other isn't going to work. And unfortunately, the missionaries have the resources to call on more powerful agents to come and support them and back them up. And so now the consequences of colonization is handing over the power of governance to outsiders. For a long time, these Igbo people, the people of Ikemefuna, they governed themselves perfectly fine. They had their means of governing themselves. It worked. But now that power belongs to people who are not from there. They are not of that community. And they are not willing to take their cultures and traditions as seriously as they were. And so, again, each step kind of seems like a reasonable step maybe, or an unavoidable step or an inevitable step. But regardless, the colonizing force is constantly displacing the traditional belief systems and the traditional values. Whether you think they're good or not doesn't really matter. The outcome of that is not really addressed by the book, but we kind of see at the end where it might go, because Okonkwo kills a messenger. He gets angry. The messengers come to break up this sort of big meeting where people are yelling, "We got to stop him, we got to kick him out." And they say, all right, everyone's going to break up, and Okonkwo kills them, and nobody else moves. Nobody else goes to do anything. And so Okonkwo looks around and he goes, these are not my people anymore. These are not the people that I grew up with. The Umuofia that I knew when I was younger would have murdered all of them, would have taken them all out, that we were a strong, warlike nation that did not take any nonsense from anyone else. That is gone, and that is dead now. And the book does not really go too much further than the death of Okonkwo. And we're left wondering what's going to happen. And the overall sort of attitude of the book, of course, is that colonization is harmful to the colonists. We don't know if it's also harmful to the colonizers. I suspect that it is in some way. But the book is from the perspective of the Igbo people. The book is from the perspective of Okonkwo. The book is really not interested in finding out whether the colonizers had gotten sad for having come on in and pushing out traditional indigenous beliefs. And it is the last lines, which I know I read in the Okonkwo video. I'm going to read again because it's a good example of how just the way the British would have just dismissed so much, where the commissioner says that Okonkwo could be a whole chapter of his book, maybe even a whole paragraph. And to see how they take these really significant elements of this village and reduce them down to a paragraph or even a sentence. It's sad. That is the feeling I got left with at the end of this book, is that it's just sadness that so much stuff is lost and will never be returned, because once the people who knew the old ways die, there was no real written record that we see. I don't really think we see anybody writing anything in this book. So once the people who knew the old ways, knew the old traditions, once they die, all of that is gone. Thousands of years of culture and tradition are gone and replaced by whatever the governor wrote in his book, or whatever people can kind of piece together from their own memories. And it is sad. It is unfortunate. And that makes it, I guess, good that Achebe, as a member of this group, as an Igbo man himself, was able to write this book and was able to tell the world, this is who we were. This is who my people were. And not filtered through someone from outside. This is filtered from someone in his community. So in terms of this book's sort of stance on colonialism, of course it's bad. Why wouldn't it be bad? It's awful. It's terrible. But ultimately it is sad, because something really interesting and beautiful is lost when a power comes in and colonizes another power. So those are my thoughts about this book and colonialism. I think we're just about done. We'll do one more video to wrap things up, and then we're off to another book. So thank you very much for sticking around. I appreciate it as always. And until the next video, I will see you later.